And our first presentation is the Cary 150 History Moment with Mr. Yerha.
Thank you, Mayor. In anticipation of Historic Preservation Month, which begins on May 1st, I thought tonight we'd focus on Cary's historic landmarks. First, what is a landmark with a capital L? It's an honor that is bestowed on an individual building, structure, or site that has historical, architectural, or cultural significance. At the same time, certain exterior changes to a landmark are subject to town review, but the landmark owner is eligible for an annual 50% property tax deferral for as long as the historic character of the property is maintained. And in Cary, we have 11 such landmarks. So let's take a look at them. The most prominent of these landmarks is this monumental building that reflects the importance that civic leaders in a small railroad town placed on education. The site was originally home to Cary Academy before the state purchased the private school and turned it into Cary Public High School, which was the state's first state-funded public high school. It later became Cary Elementary School, and now, of course, it's the Cary Arts Center. Across the street from the Cary Arts Center, the Sam's Jones House. It's an excellent and locally rare example of a Queen Anne cottage dating to the turn of the 20th century. The house was likely built by Andrew Fuller Sams, a teacher and principal at Cary High School in the early 20th century. But members of the Jones family owned the house for 61 years, beginning in 1914. Moving down Academy Street, the Dr. John Pullen Hunter House is significant for its historic association with Dr. Hunter, a Cary physician, and his family. Hunter was an influential civic booster to the town. He served on the school board for 14 years, and he helped organize the Cary High School band. Today, the house is one of the finest examples of a craftsman bungalow. And on the right-hand side, you can see that the property has the only intact original downtown chicken coop. Then there's the Pink House. The Guest White Ogle House was built in stages beginning back in the 1830s. Previous owners included Railroad Roadmaster Harrison Guest and John White, a local Baptist minister who bought the house in 1896 and substantially remodeled and expanded it. Carol and Sheila Ogle bought the house in 1997 and restored it. It's the finest, most intact, and best preserved example of Queen Anne-style architecture in Cary. By the way, piece of trivia, Mr. Ogle used to claim that the house was not pink, but technically the color was Rosario. Next to Town Hall, the Page Walker Hotel, now known as the Page Walker Arts and History Center. It was built around 1871 by Frank Page, the founder of Cary, to cater to the railroad passengers. Frank and his wife, Catherine Rabbitoe, sold the hotel to the Walker family in 1884, after which the building changed hands several more times. Major renovations were conducted in the 1940s, 1970s, 1980s, and then was purchased by the town of Cary. The Page Walker is also on the National Register of Historic Places. Downtown Cary does not have a monopoly on landmarks, however. In the Carpenter community, the circa 1880 Farmers Cooperative provided a place for farmers to buy and sell their goods. After the turn of the century, the building is believed to have served as a meeting house for the Farmers Educational and Cooperative Union. The Carpenter Supply Store on the right-hand side is an evolved crossroads commercial building that began as a one-story gable front store in 1895. In 1916, a two-story brick building was built alongside the frame store. It is thought to be the only rural brick store building in continuous use in Wake County. I encourage you to visit the store and perhaps do some shopping. Our newest landmark is the John L. and Henry G. Sears House. It's an early 20th century farmhouse that reflects the domestic life of middle-class farmers in that period. Mr. and Mrs. Sears built the house around 1915 and proceeded to farm and raise their children on the land. At one point, they owned 214 acres. The house originally stood facing Greenhope School Road, but was moved in 2017 to its current location, which is still on the original farm acreage. The current owners purchased the house after the relocation and have rehabilitated it, preserving all the surviving original features with only minor changes to the floor plan on the second floor. Next, we have 3 landmark cemeteries. The first is Hillcrest Cemetery. It's significant as the final resting place of men and women who made contributions to Cary's social, economic, political, and religious growth and development during the 19th and 20th centuries. Interred at the cemetery are 17 former mayors and a number of prominent local education and business leaders, as well as many faithful townfolk. The town acquired most of the cemetery in several transactions during the 1960s and 70s, making it the town's only municipal cemetery. Tucked away in the middle of a subdivision, the White Plains Cemetery, also known as the Nathaniel Jones Graveyard, is the final resting place of Nathaniel Jones, a Revolutionary War patriot who at one point owned over, ready for this, 10,000 acres of land in what is now eastern Cary. He served as a Wake County Commissioner, Justice of the Peace, Sheriff, Clerk of Court, member of the North Carolina General Assembly, and on and on. He named his house and property White Plains for the vast fields of cotton that surrounded his house. And then there's the First Christian Church Cemetery. It's significant because of its association with the establishment of Cary's first African-American religious congregation. Some of Cary's most prominent citizens from its earliest beginnings to the present day are buried there. The cemetery is situated on the site where Cary's first African-American church held its initial meeting in 1868 and is the only remaining resource associated with the congregation at this location. There are over 250 marked interments. Members of all denominations have been continuously buried here since the first known interment in 1896. That's it for 11 landmarks, but there are some properties that are ripe for future landmark status, such as the Ivy Ellington House. Listed in the National Register of Historic Places for architectural significance, the circa 1870 Ivy Ellington is the best remaining example of Gothic Revival domestic architecture in the county. The style is recognizable by the steeply pitched roof and gables, board and batten siding, and pointed arched windows. Actually, many passers-by mistake it for a church. This house graces Chatham Street with its charm, but is likely to be moved in the not-so-distant future. We hope it will continue to grace Cary's downtown landscape in its new location, which is still to be determined. The 1803 Nancy Jones House is listed in the National Register for its architectural significance. The house embodies distinctive characteristics of vernacular federal-style domestic architecture. The house was operated as a tavern and stagecoach stop by Nancy and Henry Jones, and Nancy continued to run it out for over 30 years after her husband passed away. It was an important stop on the Raleigh-Chapel Hill route and welcomed many guests, including President James K. Polk and practically all of the state's governors in the 19th century. The Nancy Jones House was recently located about 500 feet to east of its original location in order to best preserve it for future generations. Interesting to note that during Cary's centennial celebration in 1971, the house was open and had over 400 visitors during that time. Lastly, there are several town-owned historic properties that have recently been stabilized, repaired, and repainted and are awaiting complete renovation and future use by the town. These include the C.F. Farrell Store and Warehouses on the left and the A.M. Howard Farmhouse, currently operated as Good Hope Farm. They're both in the Carpenter area, and they portray the agricultural origins of our community. And at the extreme other end of Cary is the Barnabas Jones Farmstead at Jack Smith Park, with several intact outbuildings. The Barnabas Jones House is a very valuable historic resource. Despite being located at Jack Smith Park, there's no truth to the rumor that Jack Smith was the original occupant, though the resemblance is uncanny. We love you, Jack. Finally, a reminder about Historic Preservation Month. There'll be a number of activities are being planned for the month of May, so we ask you to please check back on the town website for information on how you can participate throughout the month of May. I want to thank the following listed there names of individuals and groups who contributed to this presentation, and I ask you to remember to visit Cary150.org, for the latest on Cary's 150th anniversary. Coming soon, by the way, will be a self-guided tour of Cary's landmarks, where you can see them up close and personal for yourself. But for tonight, that's it, and I thank you for listening.